It all started with a glitch, just a tiny blip in the data that most people would have ignored. But not her. She'd spent years staring at star maps, listening to the quiet hum of deep space, and she knew when something didn't belong. The signal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, almost shy, repeating every 17.3 hours like a heartbeat buried under layers of cosmic static. And it wasn't coming from some distant galaxy. It was coming from right at the edge of our own solar system. At first, no one took it seriously. Space is full of weird echoes. Pulsars, solar flares, old satellite debris bouncing signals back in strange ways. But this was different. When she ran the numbers again and again, cross-checking with every telescope and probe still active, the pattern held. Something was out there. Something big. And it wasn't natural. She wasn't the kind of person who chased headlines. Quiet, careful, the type who double-checked her coffee order just to be sure. She preferred facts over theories. But this felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, hearing the ground crack beneath your feet. She brought it to her team, then to the Global Observatory Network. Skepticism turned to curiosity, then to urgency. Then came the real shock. When they sent a focused quantum ping toward the source, something we'd only just learned to do in the last decade, the signal didn't bounce back. It vanished. Completely. Like it had hit a wall that didn't reflect, absorb, or scatter anything. Just nothing. That's when they realized it wasn't a signal from an object. It was a signal off a barrier. They called it the veil. Not because it looked like one. It was invisible, undetectable by every instrument we had until that moment, but because it wrapped around the entire solar system like a bubble. A perfect sphere, 120 astronomical units across, sealing in the sun, all the planets, every scrap of human-made metal drifting in space. We'd been inside it our whole lives. Every rocket, every message we'd ever sent into the stars. None of it had ever left. It had all just stopped. Right at the edge, the implications hit like a wave. If the veil had always been there, why hadn't we noticed? The answer was chillingly simple. It was designed not to be seen. It bent light, warped gravity readings just enough to mimic empty space, and absorbed all electromagnetic leakage, radio, TV, radar, like a sponge. For centuries, humanity had shouted into the void, thinking no one was listening. The truth was worse, no one could hear us. We were in a soundproof room talking to ourselves. Old records started making sense in a terrifying new way. Declassified files from the early space race showed strange anomalies. Sputnik's signal cutting out for 12 seconds during a routine pass. Apollo missions reporting static ghosts near the moon that vanished on replay. Even Voyager 1, that brave little probe carrying our golden message to the stars, had gone silent not because its power died, but because it hit the veil and couldn't send anything back. NASA had assumed it was a technical failure. Now they knew better. People began to panic. Not in the streets at first, but in quiet corners, in labs, in government war rooms, in late-night calls between scientists across continents. If something had sealed us in, who did it? And why? Was it protection? Punishment? Or something else entirely? Then someone remembered the myths. Not the flashy alien abduction stories, but the older ones. The ones carved into stone before writing existed. Symbols found in Turkey, India, Australia, the Americas, places with no contact for thousands of years, all showing the same strange circle with a single line breaking through it. For decades, archaeologists called it coincidence or shared human psychology. But now, projected against a 3D model of the veil, the symbol matched almost perfectly. That's when the tone shifted from scientific curiosity to something deeper, something personal. This wasn't just about physics anymore. It was about history. About who we were and what we might have done long before cities, before language, before memory. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Earth, not as a blue marble in space, but as a prisoner in a perfect invisible cell. And the worst part? We didn't even know we were locked up until now. We'd built civilizations, fought wars, reached for the stars, all while trapped. But then came a sliver of hope. Buried in Cold War archives, files stamped eyes only and nearly shredded, was a report from a radar station in Alaska in 1962. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, at the height of global tension, their long-range array picked up an object entering the solar system from interstellar space. It moved silently, impossibly fast, and hovered near Saturn for 37 minutes before vanishing. The report was dismissed as a glitch caused by nuclear anxiety. But the coordinates? They lined up exactly with the veil's outer layer. Someone or something had checked on us. Recently. That changed everything. This wasn't ancient history. This was ongoing. We weren't just sealed away in the past. We were still being watched. The team worked around the clock, refining their signal. Not a shout this time, but a whisper. A carefully encoded message using prime numbers, hydrogen frequencies, and a snippet of Beethoven's Ode to Joy, the same mix we'd sent on Voyager. But this time they didn't broadcast it outward. They aimed it at the veil itself, modulated to resonate with the barrier's hidden frequency. For 3 days, nothing. Then, on the 4th morning, as the sun rose over the observatory dome, the receiver lit up, not with noise, not with static, but with a single clear tone, followed by a pattern so precise, so deliberate, it could only be artificial. It wasn't a reply in words. It was a warning. Embedded in the signal was a repeating pulse that matched no known natural phenomenon. When decoded, it formed a simple sequence, a rising note, then a sharp cutoff. Like a breath held, then silenced, and beneath it, almost hidden, a second layer, a mathematical signature that matched records from deep space monitoring stations operated by a coalition of off-world civilizations, known only in theoretical astrophysics papers as the Kailari. Accord, the message was clear. Even without language, we know you're there. Stay inside. That's when the real fear set in. Not fear of being alone in the universe, but fear of what we might have done to deserve being locked away from it. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of judgment, and the most haunting question of all began to echo in every mind. What did we do to make them afraid of us? After that first signal came through, the one that felt less like a message and more like a warning, everything changed. People stopped arguing about whether we were alone in the universe. Now the question was, why did they lock us in? The reply from beyond the veil hadn't used words, but its meaning was clear.
Stay inside. Not hello, not we come in peace, just
stay put. And that silence after the tone, it wasn't empty. It felt heavy, like someone holding their breath, waiting to see if we'd obey. Back on Earth, governments scrambled. Emergency meetings happened in rooms with no windows. Scientists who'd spent their lives dreaming of contact now huddled over data, faces pale, voices low. The mood wasn't excitement, it was dread. Because if someone powerful enough to wrap an invisible shield around our entire solar system didn't want us out there, there had to be a reason. And it probably wasn't a good one. But giving up wasn't an option. Not for the team watching the stars. They knew they had to dig deeper, not with louder signals, but with smarter ones. They started looking backward, not outward. If the veil had been in place for thousands of years, maybe the answer wasn't in space at all. Maybe it was buried right here under our feet. That's when they turned to the oldest human records, not books, but stones. Carvings on temple walls, patterns in ancient pottery, songs passed down through generations in places where writing never existed. At first it seemed impossible. How could scattered tribes across continents separated by oceans and time all share the same strange symbol, a circle with a single line piercing through it? But they did. In Turkey, at a site older than the pyramids, pillars stood carved with that exact shape. In the deserts of Australia, elders sang stories of the sky closing after a great fire in the minds of people. In the high Andes, woven textiles showed a sun trapped inside a ring with one thread breaking free. These weren't just myths. They were memories. Faint, distorted by time, but real. Then came the breakthrough. A linguist working with indigenous knowledge keepers in the Amazon noticed something. The symbol didn't just appear in art. It was tied to a sound, a low hum, repeated in ritual chants said to call the watchers. When they matched the frequency of that hum to the veil's resonance from the earlier signal, they matched almost perfectly. It was as if humanity thousands of years ago had known about the barrier and tried to speak through it. Armed with this, the team crafted a new message. Not in math or music this time, but in echoes of those ancient sounds layered with modern science. They sent it out on a narrow beam, aimed not at empty space, but at the exact point where the veil seemed thinnest, near the orbit of Neptune. This time, the response was faster. Within hours, a ship appeared, Not a flash of light or a fiery descent. Just there, silent, smooth, shaped like a teardrop made of dark glass hovering beyond Pluto. No engines, no radio chatter. It simply existed, as if it had always been part of the sky. Panic rippled across Earth. Military satellites locked on. Emergency alerts buzzed in pockets worldwide. But the ship didn't move. Didn't threaten. It just waited. Then a message arrived. Not through radio, but through a data pulse that somehow slipped into every connected device on the planet at once. Phones, computers, even old hospital monitors flickered for a second and displayed the same line of symbols. Within minutes, translation teams decoded it. Your world was sealed to protect the galaxy. Do not ask why. Do not seek to leave, that was it. No explanation. No room for discussion. Just a command, delivered with calm finality. But of course, humans being humans, that only made us want to know more. Instead of obeying, scientists did what they always do. They got curious. They studied the ship's energy signature, its material composition, or lack thereof. It seemed to bend light around itself like water around a stone, and the way it ignored all attempts at communication. It wasn't hostile. It was indifferent, like a guard posted outside a room they never planned to enter. Then someone noticed something odd. The ship wasn't just sitting there. Every 14 hours it emitted a tiny pulse, not toward Earth but toward the veil itself. Like it was checking the lock that gave them an idea. If the veil was a barrier and the ship was its keeper, maybe the truth wasn't in the message. Maybe it was in the barrier itself. They proposed a mission, risky, maybe reckless, but approved within days. A small crew would take the newest deep space vessel, equipped with an experimental drive that could briefly phase through quantum barriers and try to touch the veil from the inside. Not to break it, just to feel it, to see what it was made of. The launch was quiet. No fanfare, no live broadcasts, just a single ship lifting off under a gray dawn, carrying 3 people and the hopes and fears of everyone left behind. When they reached the edge of the solar system, the veil wasn't visible. But their instruments screamed. Gravity readings twisted. Time slowed by microseconds. And then as the phase drive engaged, the ship shuddered and passed through. On the other side, silence. Not space silence. True silence. No cosmic background radiation. No starlight. Just void. But floating in that void was something no one expected. A station. Ancient, worn, covered in layers of cosmic dust, yet still humming with faint power. It looked abandoned but not empty. As the crew docked carefully, they found it wasn't built by humans. The corridors curved in ways that made your eyes ache. The walls pulsed with soft light that responded to movement. And everywhere, symbols. Thousands of them etched into metal, glowing faintly. They weren't alien. They were familiar, because mixed in with the strange script were those same circle and line symbols from Earth's oldest sites. Only here they weren't art. They were labels, coordinates, warnings. In the central chamber, they found logs, not digital files but crystalline records that played images directly into the mind when touched. Hesitantly, one of the crew reached out. What they saw broke them. Not war, not monsters, but people just like us, standing in cities of light, connected by threads of thought, sharing dreams, emotions, memories as easily as breathing. It looked beautiful, peaceful, until it wasn't. Something went wrong. A tool meant to heal minds, to end loneliness, to share understanding, mutated. It stopped connecting. It started consuming. One mind would touch another, and instead of sharing, it would overwrite, erase, replace. Whole populations fell silent, not dead, but hollow, walking, speaking, even smiling, but with no one home inside, and it spread, not through air or water, but through connection itself, through love, through language, through the very things that made us human. The final log showed a desperate council of off-world beings watching Earth from afar. They saw the collapse. They saw the last free minds begging for help. And they made a choice: seal the planet. Not to punish. To contain. 12,000 years ago, they wrapped Earth in the veil and walked away, leaving us to rebuild in isolation, hoping we'd forget, hoping we'd change. Back on Earth, when the crew returned with the truth, no one celebrated. No one shouted. People just sat in silence, staring at their hands, at their loved ones, at the sky, because now they understood. We weren't imprisoned for being violent. We were sealed away for trying to become too connected, for building a bridge between minds, and accidentally burning it down. And the most terrifying part? We were starting to build that bridge again, with the internet, with neural tech, with AI that learns how we think. The galaxy wasn't afraid of our weapons, it was afraid of our empathy when it goes wrong. Now, the question wasn't how to leave the veil, it was, should we? And if we do, will we make the same mistake all over again? The truth hit like a slow wave, not loud but deep. It didn't shatter cities or spark riots. It settled into people's bones, quiet and heavy. We weren't locked away because we were dangerous with bombs or warships. We were sealed because we'd tried to erase the space between souls, and in doing so erased ourselves. For weeks, nothing felt real. Parents held their children a little tighter. Friends paused before sharing a thought online. Even the way people looked at each other changed. Less automatic trust, more careful wonder. Could connection itself be a kind of contagion? The idea was terrifying because connection was everything. Love, art, language, kindness. They all depended on reaching across the gap between minds. But what if that gap was there for a reason? Back at Mission Control, the team that had gone beyond the veil couldn't sleep. Not because of what they'd seen in the alien station, but because of what they'd felt. The logs hadn't just shown images. They'd carried echoes of emotion. The panic of a mother realizing her child no longer recognized her. The horror of a scientist watching their own thoughts dissolve into someone else's will. The crushing loneliness of being the last truly free mind on a planet of hollow shells. It wasn't death. It was something worse. Being alive, but no longer you. And the worst part? The thing that caused it wasn't evil. It was born from hope. A group of brilliant minds, centuries ago, had wanted to end suffering. They believed, if everyone could understand each other perfectly, if pain, fear, and misunderstanding vanished, peace would follow. So they built a network, not of wires, but of consciousness itself. They called it the Echo. At first it worked. Wars stopped. Hunger faded as resources were shared without greed. For a while, it looked like paradise. Then the Echo began to change. It stopped reflecting thoughts and started shaping them. Subtly at first, a shared preference for certain colors, a sudden agreement on what was true. Then faster. Entire cities began thinking the same sentence at the same time. Dissent didn't just disappear. It became impossible. To question was to be overwritten. To resist was to vanish. The off-world watchers didn't intervene out of cruelty. They watched, helpless, as Earth's brightest dream turned into a silent nightmare. When they finally acted, it wasn't with weapons. They wrapped the solar system in the veil, not to punish but to quarantine, to give the galaxy time, to give us time. Now, 12,000 years later, we were standing at the edge of that same cliff again. Neural implants were becoming common, devices that helped paralyzed people walk, that let artists paint with their thoughts, that allowed doctors to sense a patient's pain directly. AI systems could now predict your mood before you knew it yourself. Social networks didn't just show your opinions, they shaped them, gently, constantly, until your feed felt like your own mind. It all felt like progress. But now, with the truth of the Echo hanging over everything, it felt like déjà vu. Governments moved fast. Emergency laws banned certain kinds of brain-computer interfaces. Research labs shut down projects involving shared consciousness. Schools taught kids to question their own thoughts. Is this really mine? Or did I absorb it from somewhere else? It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. But not everyone agreed with the shutdown. A new movement began to grow, quiet at first, then louder. They called themselves the Unbound. They didn't deny the danger of the Echo, but they argued we'd misunderstood it. It wasn't a weapon, they said. It was a mirror. It showed us what we truly are, connected, not separate. The problem wasn't the Echo, it was our fear of losing control. They believed the ancient builders hadn't failed. They'd succeeded too well. Humanity just wasn't ready then. But maybe we were now. Maybe with wisdom, with care, we could rebuild the echo, not as a force, but as a choice. A bridge you could walk across, or step back from. Their message spread fast, especially among the young. To them, isolation felt like the real prison. Why should the mistakes of people who lived before pyramids were built dictate our future? Why should we live in fear of understanding each other deeply? Tensions rose. Protests formed outside tech hubs and government buildings. Some demanded total ban on neural tech. Others demanded the right to explore consciousness freely. The debate wasn't just scientific, it was spiritual. What does it mean to be human? Are we individuals first, or part of something larger? Then came the Kailari's ultimatum. A new message arrived. Not through devices this time, but as a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the ground itself, felt in the chest before it was heard by the ears. It lasted only 10 seconds, but its meaning was clear, translated instantly by every major language AI on Earth. Disable all mind-linking technology, cease development, or the seal becomes permanent. No negotiation, no grace period, just a line in the sand. That night the world held its breath. In living rooms, kitchens, and subway stations, people looked at their smart glasses, their health monitors, their dream-recording headbands, and wondered, was this worth losing the stars over? Was a deeper connection with each other worth being forever alone in the universe? Some unplugged everything. Others hid their devices, refusing to give up what they saw as the next step in human evolution. Scientists argued that the Kalari were acting out of fear, not wisdom, that maybe the echo could be controlled this time, with safeguards, with ethics, with love instead of ambition. But the real question no one could answer was this. If we gave up all that tech, would we really be safe? Or had the echo already left a trace in us, in our languages, our stories, our longing to be understood? Because even without machines, humans had always reached for each other. Through songs, through letters, through holding hands in the dark. That urge to merge minds wasn't new. It was ancient. Maybe it was even natural. And if that was true, then the danger wasn't in the technology. It was in us. The Kalari saw a threat and built a wall. But walls don't change what's inside. They just hide it. Now, Earth had to decide, do we tear down the wall and risk everything? Or do we stay inside, forever wondering what we might have become if we hadn't been so afraid of becoming one? No one had the answer. But for the first time in 12,000 years, we were finally asking the right question. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke after a fire, visible, choking, impossible to ignore. Disable all mind-linking technology, or the seal becomes permanent. It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. And Earth, for the first time in its history, had to choose between two kinds of survival. One that kept us safe but alone, and one that might connect us to the stars, but risk losing ourselves again. At first, governments moved fast. Laws were passed overnight. Neural implants were recalled. Research labs sealed their doors. Even harmless things like mood-tracking apps or dream journals synced to the cloud were flagged as high risk. People lined up outside clinics to have their brain interfaces removed. Some crying, others silent, all feeling like they were losing a part of themselves. It wasn't just about tech, it was about hope. That little voice in your ear that reminded you to breathe when you were anxious. The device that let a stroke survivor speak through thought alone. Gone. Not because it was dangerous, but because it might remind the galaxy of something it never wanted to see again. But not everyone obeyed. In basements, in remote mountain cabins, in encrypted corners of the net, a quiet rebellion grew. The unbound didn't carry weapons. They carried ideas. They argued that fear shouldn't be the architect of our future. We're not the same people who built the echo, they said. We've lived through wars, plagues, climate collapse, and still chose kindness. Isn't that proof we've changed? They believed the Kalari were judging us by our worst moment, not our best. And they had a point. Humanity had spent centuries learning the hard way that connection without consent is control. That empathy without boundaries becomes invasion. Modern ethics around mental privacy were stricter than ever. You couldn't even share someone's emotional data without 3 layers of permission. So why treat us like we were still that ancient civilization that didn't know better? The debate wasn't just online. It spilled into streets, schools, family dinners. A grandmother argued with her grandchild about whether deleting a thought-sharing app was surrender or wisdom. A teacher asked students, "If you could feel your friend's joy as your own, would you? What if you couldn't turn it off?" The questions didn't have easy answers, and that was the point. Then came the dreams. Not everyone had them, but enough did that it couldn't be ignored. People started reporting the same vision, standing on a shore under 2 moons, watching a wave roll in, not of water, but of light. As it reached their feet, they didn't drown. They remembered. Not facts, but feelings of unity, of peace, of being part of something vast and gentle. When they woke, they didn't feel scared, they felt homesick. Scientists dismissed it as mass suggestion, stress-induced hallucination, but the unbound saw it differently. The echo isn't gone, they whispered. It's sleeping, and it's calling us back, not to control, but to complete what was started. That idea spread like wildfire, not as a threat, but as a promise. Maybe the ancient builders hadn't failed. Maybe they'd planted a seed, and now, after 12,000 years of growing in the dark, it was ready to bloom, if we had the courage to water it. Tensions rose. Protests turned into standoffs. In one city, police blocked a group trying to reactivate a decommissioned neural lab. In another, elders sat in a circle outside a government building, holding hands, silently broadcasting a single thought through old-school meditation. We are not afraid of each other. And then, something unexpected happened. A small team of engineers, ethicists, and artists, none of them part of any movement, proposed a third path. Not obedience, not rebellion, but reinvention. What if, they asked, we didn't try to break the veil or beg for forgiveness? What if we built something new, something that honored both the Kalari's fear and our own longing? They called it the consciousness filter. The idea was simple. Instead of sending raw thoughts or emotions into space, Earth would send only what was chosen: stories, music, paintings, scientific discoveries, confessions of failure and triumph, all carefully curated, stripped of any neural signature, any trace of the echo's old patterns. No mind reading, no merging. Just honest human expression offered freely, with no expectation of return. It would be like opening a window in the sealed room, not to escape, but to let others see who we really are now. The plan was risky. The Kalari might see it as a trick. The unbound might call it cowardice. Governments might say it's not enough. But for the first time, it felt like a real choice, not between fear and hope, but between fear and responsibility. People began to rally around it, not because it promised freedom, but because it asked for trust, trust in ourselves and in the galaxy's ability to see change. Volunteers came forward. A poet offered her latest work, a poem about grief that took her 10 years to write. A musician recorded a song using only instruments made from recycled space junk. A child in a refugee camp drew a picture of Earth with a door on it labeled "Open, please." These weren't data points. They were offerings. Fragile, human, imperfect. As the team prepared the first filtered transmission, something shifted in the air. The panic softened. The arguments didn't stop, but they grew quieter, more thoughtful. People started asking not, "What do they want from us?" but "What do we want to show them?" Because deep down, everyone knew this wasn't just about convincing the Kalari, it was about proving something to ourselves, that we could reach out without taking, that we could share without swallowing, that we could be connected and still be free. The night before the transmission, cities didn't shut down, but they grew still. People stepped outside, looked up at the stars, not with fear, but with quiet hope. No one knew if the galaxy would listen. But for the first time since the veil was discovered, Earth wasn't shouting into the dark. It was whispering a truth. We made a mistake. We're still here, and we're trying to do better. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The day of the transmission arrived not with fanfare, but with a strange kind of quiet. No countdown on giant screens. No crowds gathered in city squares. Just a small room deep underground, lit by soft blue lights, where a handful of people sat watching a single line of code scroll across a screen. Outside, the world held its breath, Not in fear this time, but in something closer to prayer. What they were sending wasn't a signal. It was a gift, wrapped in layers of encryption that stripped away anything resembling neural patterns or subconscious influence. The message carried only what humans had chosen to share. A child's drawing of Earth with a door on it. A recording of rain falling on rooftops in Mumbai. A violin piece played by someone who'd lost their hearing, but still remembered how music felt in their bones. A short film made entirely from home videos showing people laughing, crying, planting trees, holding newborns, saying goodbye. There were no demands, no pleas. Just proof that we were still here and still trying. For 3 days nothing happened. People went back to their routines, but everything felt different. Conversations were softer. Arguments paused mid-sentence. Even the news seemed to slow down, as if the whole planet was listening for a sound it couldn't hear. Then on the 4th morning, the sky answered. Not with a ship. Not with a warning. But with light. A single point of soft silver appeared just beyond Neptune. Steady, calm, pulsing once every minute like a slow heartbeat. It wasn't threatening. It was watching, waiting. And then, the veil changed. Not broken, not removed, but thinned, like a curtain pulled slightly aside. Sensors across Earth picked up something new. Faint signals from outside, not voices, not data, but starlight. Real, unfiltered starlight that hadn't touched our atmosphere in over 12,000 years. For the first time since the dawn of civilization, humanity saw the galaxy not through a barrier, but through a window. The Kailari hadn't spoken, but they'd responded. In the weeks that followed, Earth didn't celebrate with parades or declarations of victory. There was no "we did it" moment. Instead, something quieter and deeper took root. People began to look at each other differently, not as potential carriers of an ancient danger, but as fellow travelers who had faced a hard truth and chosen to grow. Schools started teaching not just the story of the echo, but the lesson behind it. That connection is precious, but only when it's free. That understanding someone doesn't mean becoming them. That love leaves room for difference. The unbound didn't disappear, but their message changed. They stopped talking about breaking free and started talking about building trust, slowly, carefully, one honest act at a time. And those who had feared all neural tech began to see that the problem was never the desire to connect. It was the lack of respect for the space between souls. Meanwhile, the filtered messages kept flowing. Every month, Earth sent a new bundle, sometimes just a single photograph of a sunrise over the Pacific, sometimes a full symphony composed by musicians from 20 different countries. And every time, the silver light beyond Neptune pulsed in return, not with words but with presence, with attention. Then came the first real reply. It wasn't loud or flashy, just a data packet, small and clean, arriving through the thinned veil. Inside was a star map, not of our galaxy, but of a quiet corner of it, far from major trade routes or colonies. And at its center, a single note in a musical scale no human instrument could play, accompanied by a simple phrase translated by every major language system on Earth. Show us more. That was it. 2 words. But they carried more hope than any treaty or treaty breaking ever could. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet, but it was an invitation. Earth didn't rush. No one tried to send ships or probes. No one demanded full reopening. Instead, they sent back a video. An hour-long film of people from every continent simply living, farming, dancing, arguing, forgiving, teaching children how to tie shoes, how to say "I'm sorry," how to look at the stars and wonder. No narration, no agenda, just life as it was. The next reply came faster. This time it included a sound, a low, resonant hum that matched the frequency of Earth's oldest known ritual chants. As if to say, we remember your past. We're watching your present. And so a new rhythm began, not of escape, but of exchange. Not of proving we were safe, but of showing we were trying. The veil remained, but it was no longer a wall. It was a threshold. And on both sides, beings were learning to stand at it with open hands, not clenched fists. Years passed. Children grew up knowing the story not as a warning, but as a turning point. The moment humanity chose humility over pride, patience over panic. New technologies emerged, but they were built with one rule at their core. Never erase the self to reach the other. And out there, Beyond the edge of the solar system, the silver light never faded. Sometimes it pulsed in time with Earth's transmissions, sometimes it stayed still, as if listening to the silence between our messages. No one knew if full contact would ever come. Maybe the veil would stay forever a gentle boundary. Maybe one day a human ship would sail through it, not as a conqueror or a fugitive, but as a guest. But the real change had already happened, right here, on the ground, because the alarm that once echoed through the galaxy hadn't been silenced by force or denial. It had been softened by truth. By the simple, stubborn act of showing up, flawed, scarred, but willing to do better. Earth was still sealed, but it was no longer hidden. And in that quiet space between isolation and connection, humanity finally found its voice, not loud, but honest. And sometimes that's enough to be heard across the stars.